Okay, let's talk about timers. WKInterfaceTimer. WKInterfaceTimer is a way that allows you to specify a countdown or a count up timer on a label. So if you go down and search in Object Library for timer, and then go ahead and drag it over to your app in the storyboard, you're presented with several options under the Attributes Inspector. One is the format. So this is positional. There's also abbreviated, short, full. If you increase the number of lines under full, you'll see the full value. And then spelled out. You'll have to go to 3 lines to see the spelled out version. Okay, I'm going to stick with positional for this demo. And what I'm going to do is show you the option of selecting enabled by default. What enabled allows you to do is once the controller is in view, the timer kicks off. So let me show you that right now. So let's go ahead and run. So once this launches, so it launched. As soon as it became visible, it started timing. Okay. So this was a count up timer. So there are other options that you can choose under units. So what you want to be visible in the timer. For example, I can add a day here. I could add the week, right? I can add month. I could just have just the month. I could show just the month and the week, month, week, and day, hour, minute, seconds, and I can also include the year. Preview seconds is only for the storyboard, so that you can play around with different values there and get a feel of what it'll look like in your app. All right, let's get into the code a little bit. So go ahead and pull up the Assistant Editor, and you can get rid of that sidebar. Go ahead and control click and drag an outlet onto your controller. Let's call this my timer. Okay. Now in your will activate method, as soon as your app launch is about to launch, we're going to do a little bit of setup. So we're going to reference our timer, my timer, then we're going to set the date on it. Now here is where the magic happens. So let me show you what happens when we set the date to the current date just by doing NSDate. Go ahead and run it. As soon as it launches, you see what happens. So it launched and it kicked off the timer. So it's effectively the same as leaving it enabled and not giving it a date. It'll just use the current date. So let me show you now what happens when we come in and let's actually clean this up a little bit. I don't care to show all that information. In fact, I just want to show minutes and seconds for this one. And let's bring up the Assistant Editor again. Move this away. And let me show you what happens when you set an NSDate that's different than the current NSDate. So what I'm doing here is I'm showing what happens when we set a time interval since now of 10. So that's going to be 10 seconds into the future, and let me show you what happens. So I'll go ahead and run it. As soon as it launches, you can see what happens. Okay, so it's going to start counting from 10 seconds, but I actually haven't started it. Okay, it's going to count down from 10 seconds. So let me do my timer.start. Let me show you what happens here. As soon as it launches, okay, it's going to start counting down from 10 seconds. Now you might ask, how do I get it to count up? All right, we saw what happens when we do NSDate, starts counting up from the current time. But what if I wanted to start counting up from a specific time? Let's say 30 seconds. Okay, what you're going to want to do is put a negative on that number. All right, that'll start it counting from that time. So let's see what happens when we launch, and starts counting at 30 and starts counting up. So we've gone through the basics of a WKInterfaceTimer. I walked you through a few examples. Starting counting up from now would be setting the date to NS date. To count down from 10 seconds, set it to an NS date that is based on a time interval since now of 10. And if you wanted to start counting at a specific time, you put a negative in front of that on the time interval since now. We walked through what was in Interface Builder as far as what is available to us under a WKInterfaceTimer as far as attributes go, and the different formats and units that you can display with a timer. And that's it.